You think death is the moment everything goes dark? The screen cuts to black, and you're gone. But the most detailed recording we have of a dying human brain shows the opposite. In the final seconds, it didn't shut down. It lit up, a storm of activity, in the exact pattern your brain makes when you're remembering your life. Death might not be a fade to black at all. It might be the brightest your mind ever gets. For most of human history, we pictured death as a switch. One moment the lights are on, the next they're off. The heart stops, the blood stops, the brain goes dark, and whoever you were simply ends. It's a clean story. It's the one almost everyone believes. And it's wrong, because death isn't a switch. It's a process. And inside the narrow window where that process unfolds, something happens in your skull that scientists are only beginning to understand and still can't fully explain. Start with what actually happens when your heart stops. Within seconds, blood stops reaching your brain. Every neuron you have holds a tiny electrical charge, like a battery that has to be constantly topped up by a steady flow of oxygen and blood. Cut that supply, and the charge starts to drain. Your neurons, starved, can no longer fire the way they normally do. By about 10 seconds, you lose consciousness. And for a long time, scientists assumed that was the whole story. No oxygen, no charge, no activity, a flat line. But the brain is not a light bulb. It doesn't simply blink out. It has reserves. It has electricity still moving through it. And when researchers finally looked closely at those final moments, they found the dying brain doing something nobody had predicted. In 2013, a neuroscientist named Jimo Borjigin at the University of Michigan was studying the brains of rats at the moment of death. The assumption going in was simple. After the heart stops, brain activity should fade quietly toward nothing. That's not what happened. In the 30 seconds after the rat's heart stopped, their brains didn't go quiet, they surged. A wave of highly organized, high-frequency electrical activity swept across the brain. The kind of activity tied not to shutting down, but to intense, conscious processing. For a brief moment, by some measures, the dying brain was more active than it had been while the animal was wide awake. Borjigin's team had stumbled onto something strange. The brain, in the act of dying, seemed to switch on. But these were rats, and a rat can't tell you what it felt. The real question, the one that actually mattered, was whether the same thing happens inside a dying human being. For obvious reasons, that's almost impossible to study. You can't schedule a death. You can't wire someone up and simply wait. And then in 2022, by pure accident, it happened. An 87-year-old man was admitted to a hospital after a fall. He had developed epilepsy. And to monitor his seizures, doctors connected him to an EEG, a device that continuously records the brain's electrical activity. While he was being monitored, he had a heart attack, and he died. Nobody planned it. Nobody could have. But for the first time in recorded history, a machine was capturing a human brain in the exact moments before and after death, roughly 30 seconds on each side of the final heartbeat. When the neurosurgeon Ajmal Zemmar and his team analyzed that recording and published it in 2022, they found something that stopped them cold. In those final seconds, the man's brain produced a surge of gamma waves. Here's why that matters. Gamma waves aren't random static. They're the brain's signature for some of its most complex work: deep concentration, dreaming, and above all, memory retrieval. Gamma is the rhythm your brain runs when you reach back, pull up a memory, and replay it in your mind, which means that in the seconds around his death, this man's brain was firing in the exact pattern it uses to remember. The researchers were careful. They said it gently. But the implication was impossible to ignore. The dying brain may replay your life. That old cliche, your life flashing before your eyes, might not be a metaphor at all. It might be the literal electrical signature of a brain reaching back through everything it has ever stored one final time. And think about what that would mean. Not a slideshow someone shows you, not a film you sit and watch. Your own brain, on its way out, choosing to spend its last spark of energy on you, on your memories, your people, your life. The most expensive thing a dying brain can do is fire that hard. And it appears to do it anyway. But one patient is not proof. A single brain. A single accident. A man who was elderly and epileptic. It could have been a fluke. Good scientists don't build a conclusion on one recording, and Borjigin knew that better than anyone. So she went looking for more. In 2023, her team at Michigan studied the brains of 4 people who were dying, comatose patients whose families had agreed to withdraw life support. As that support was removed and their hearts began to fail, the researchers watched their brains. In 2 of the 4, the same thing happened. As the body shut down, a region deep in the back of the brain lit up, an area scientists sometimes call a hot zone for consciousness, the part tied to awareness and perception. It flooded with gamma activity The same memory and consciousness rhythm seen in the rats and in the 87-year-old man, two separate species, three separate studies, a decade apart, all pointing at the same impossible idea. The brain does not go quietly. In its final moments, it does something that looks, from the outside, like a last, furious burst of experience. And that raises the question nobody can fully answer. What is it like? We can read the electricity. We can map the surge. But we can't ask the dying what they're living through in that moment. The closest we have are the people who came back, patients whose hearts stopped, who were declared clinically dead, and who were then pulled back. For decades, these people have reported the same strange handful of things. A feeling of profound peace. A sense of leaving the body and looking down on it. A tunnel. A light. And again. A life review. Not scattered memories, but a vivid, rushing replay of their past, sometimes seen from the perspective of the people they had affected. Science long dismissed all of this as the hallucinations of an oxygen-starved brain. And it may be exactly that. But the doctor Sam Parnia spent years running large studies on cardiac arrest survivors, and his work found something uncomfortable. Some patients showed signs of awareness, even recall, during periods when their brains should have been completely offline. In a few cases, brain activity briefly climbed back toward near-normal levels deep into CPR, far later than anyone thought possible. Now line that up. The recordings show that in the final seconds, the brain really does fire in the rhythm of memory. The survivors describe a replay of their lives. The data and the stories have started pointing in the same direction. And that's what makes this so unsettling. The thing humans have whispered about dying for centuries, the peace, the light, the replay of a whole life, might have a real electrical event sitting underneath it. There's one more piece, and it might be the strangest of all. Time. We measure these surges in seconds, 30, maybe 60, but your sense of time isn't fixed. It's something your brain builds, moment to moment, and in states of extreme intensity. People report time stretching, slowing, nearly stopping. A car crash that lasts half a second can feel like it unfolds across minutes. So we don't actually know how long those final seconds last from the inside. 30 seconds on a clock, in a brain flooded with its own entire history, firing faster than it ever has in your life. There may be no way to know whether that feels like 30 seconds or 30 minutes, or something that, from within, has no end at all. So here's what we actually know about the final seconds before you die. Your heart stops, your blood stops, and instead of going dark, your brain surges, flooding with the same electrical rhythm it uses to remember, to dream, to be aware. In rats, in an elderly man, in dying patients, the pattern keeps repeating. The dying brain doesn't fade out, it flares up, and it may spend its last moments doing the one thing it has done your entire life, telling you the story of who you are. We don't have all the answers. This science is new. The samples are small, and honest researchers will be the first to tell you we are at the very beginning of understanding it. But the old story, that death is just the lights going out, is already gone. It doesn't match what the machines have seen. Maybe death isn't an ending you experience as nothing. Maybe it's the last thing your brain ever does for you, gathering up every moment you ever lived, every face, every ordinary afternoon you were sure you'd forgotten, and playing it all back. Not for anyone else, but for you. One final time, the lights don't just switch off. It seems they burn brightest right at the end.